Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really digging into some of the most complex global issues simmering right now.
Yeah, definitely a lot on the plate.
We're looking at the enduring stalemate in Gaza, Donald Trump's significant influence on international affairs, and the evolving dynamics of the war in Ukraine.
And those shifts in U.S. public opinion, too.
Right, exactly. We'll examine some fascinating shifts there as well.
It's certainly a busy geopolitical landscape. Our sources for this, well, this deep dive, they come from a variety of respected analyses and reports. Responsible Statecraft, Politico, Gallup News, the European Training Foundation, among others.
And our mission, as always,
is to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge from these sources, helping you understand not just the what, but, the why behind the headlines.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have a lot to cover. From seemingly irreconcilable visions in the Middle East to a potential reshaping of U.S. defense policy. What's the immediate takeaway as we begin to unravel these threads?
Well, what's immediately clear is just the sheer complexity. There are so many interconnected layers, and look, each actor has these deeply entrenched interests and fears that profoundly drive their actions. It's less about simple solutions and more about navigating a mosaic of often conflicting priorities.
That's a crucial distinction.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with Gaza then. Our sources describe the situation there as a devastating stalemate, driven by fundamentally irreconcilable visions.
Yeah.
But what's truly striking, you mentioned the actors, it's not just between Israel and the Palestinians, is it?
No, not at all.
It's critically among the key Arab states themselves. Can you maybe break down what those irreconcilable visions look like from each of these major regional players?
Yeah, it's a vital point, and each position is incredibly entrenched. So, for example, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government, they're very clear on their war aims, destroying Hamas and freeing hostages.
Okay.
Yet their actions seem to prioritize the former. They explicitly rule out Palestinian Authority governance in Gaza and insist on indefinite Israeli security control over the entire area west of the Jordan River.
Indefinite control.
Yes. And this stance, it's reinforced by far-right coalition partners, even contemplating mass displacement and the dissolution of the PA. It's a very assertive, very unyielding position.
And on the other side, Hamas, despite being battered, they're showing resilience.
They are. They're reportedly regrouping, maybe open to ceding governance, but their red line is complete disarmament.
Which is obviously a non-starter for Israel.
And for the UAE and Jordan, too. Just unacceptable. Then there's the Palestinian Authority under Mahmoud Abbas, described as weak, plagued by internal divisions, lacking legitimacy.
And that deep Fatah-Hamas schism, that long-standing split.
Right. The often violent division between the more secular Fatah, which runs the PA, and Islamist Hamas, it just prevents a unified Palestinian leadership from emerging, which, frankly, just compounds the gridlock.
Okay, so if we connect this to the bigger picture, the Arab world, you said it's a fractured landscape.
Equally fractured, yes. Competing visions everywhere. And what's truly insightful here is how this disunity kind of ironically reinforces the stalemate. Well, without a unified Arab front, there's just less external pressure for Israel to maybe shift its stance. It lets those entrenched positions harden even further. It creates a vacuum, really, where no one has the leverage to force a different outcome.
So let's look at some of those individual positions. Egypt, for instance.
Egypt is primarily driven by, well, an existential fear of inheriting millions of displaced Palestinians.
Right. That makes sense geographically.
Exactly. So its goal is stability, maintaining communication channels with Hamas as a mediator, pushing for this substantial reconstruction plan for Gaza, though that plan has kind of floundered against Israeli and U.S. indifference.
And then you have the UAE. Very different approach.
Very different. The UAE approaches this from, let's say, an ideological commitment to eradicating political Islam. They view Hamas as an entity to be eliminated.
And they actively lobbied against Egypt's plan.
Reportedly, yes. Lobbied the Trump administration to torpedo it, seeing it as too accommodating to Hamas. Their vision centers on Mohammed Dalan,
the former Fatah security chief.
That's him. Controversial past, strong ties to the Gulf. They see him governing a post-Hamas Gaza, maybe even in coordination with Israel. It's a very distinct, almost ideological angle.
Okay, and Jordan, bordering the West Bank.
For Jordan, this whole thing is an existential threat. Mass displacement is a complete red line for them. They've also recently banned the Muslim Brotherhood, so they're aligning their anti-displacement stance with an anti-Hamas position.
And Qatar, playing a different role again.
A complex game, yeah. Hosting Hamas, serving as a key financial supporter of Gaza, they insist engagement with Hamas is indispensable for mediation, and they leverage their role as host of the big U.S. Al-Udeid air base.
Right. And finally, Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, we learn, firmly links any normalization with Israel to establishing a Palestinian state, based on 1967 borders, East Jerusalem as its capital.
But they also oppose Iranian-backed militias like Hamas.
Strategically, yes. It's interesting, Saudi-owned media initially labeled Hamas leaders terrorists, but then kind of softened its tone, especially after some provocative remarks from Netanyahu and Trump about displacement. It really shows the complex dance these nations are doing, balancing stated positions with pragmatic geopolitical concerns.
This all raises a critical question. What about the people? The ones caught in the middle of all these irreconcilable visions? The humanitarian impact sounds absolutely staggering.
It is. We learned that 1.9 million people, that's approximately 90% of Gaza's population, have been displaced. Many multiple times.
90%.
Yeah. The conditions are severe. Nearly all households living in poverty, relying on aid. And the education system, catastrophic damage. 95.5% of schools damaged.
A lost generation.
Gaza faces the threat of a lost generation of learners. Yes, they've missed over an entire academic year.
And the economy?
Equally bleak, unemployment hit 80% by the end of 2024, nearly double the pre-war rate. Our sources suggest Gaza's GDP per capita might not even return to pre-war levels until, get this, 2038. It paints a very, very dire picture. Widespread devastation, a profound crisis in human capital. It truly underscores the immense human cost when political solutions just remain elusive.
And speaking of elusive solutions, the prospect of a new U.S. administration could dramatically alter the landscape, couldn't it? Not just in the Middle East, but globally. What can we expect if Donald Trump returns? How might his approach reshape these dynamics?
This is where things get particularly interesting. Trump's potential return is expected to bring back his America First and Make America Great Again slogans.
Right.
Driven by what our sources describe as a tremendous and largely unfounded faith in his ability to analyze situations, make decisions, and negotiate solutions. His own ability.
Highly personalized ad hoc.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've already seen this approach in action. For example, regarding a potential Gaza ceasefire, he reportedly guaranteed a 60-day ceasefire to Hamas.
Guaranteed it. How?
While trying to reassure them that Israel wouldn't unilaterally resume fighting. He even plans to personally announce the agreement, which really underscores his belief in his own unique diplomatic capabilities.
And his relationship with Netanyahu. That's quite something, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Fascinating. Despite shifting between, mutual high praise and outright hostility, our sources say they always find their way back to each other.
Netanyahu has sway over him.
Tremendous sway, it seems. Even convinced him to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal back in 2018. Trump has even contradicted his own cabinet, his intelligence analysts, about strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, insisting they were completely destroyed despite, a lack of evidence.
So the personal connection outweighs the institutional advice sometimes.
Often, it seems. Yeah.
Which leads us to U.S. military and defense policy under a potential Trump administration. He's thinking about renaming the Department of Defense.
He has been ruminating again, as the sources put it, about returning it to its original name, the Department of War.
The Department of War. What's the thinking there?
Well, proponents argue this could lead to a leaner, cheaper force. By focusing the agency solely on waging war, rather than what they call the expansive and flabby understanding, that includes things like humanitarian ops or nation building, it's a very specific, maybe narrower vision of the military's role.
Okay, beyond leadership and names, our sources also talk about this revolving door phenomenon affecting defense policy right now.
Yes, it paints quite a picture, doesn't it?
It seems so. We're seeing Biden administration defense officials rapidly moving into these incredibly lucrative roles within the very war industry they once regulated. What does that pattern reveal?
Well, it reveals a concerning trend, to say the least. I mean, look at former Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. Launched Clarion Strategies less than 6 months after leaving office, a firm aiming to court defense industry clients.
Okay.
His former chief of staff, Derek Chollet, joined J.P. Morgan Chase to lead its Center for Geopolitics. That center advocates for a larger defense budget and buying weapons from companies like Lockheed Martin, which just happens to be a J.P. Morgan Chase client.
Anyone else?
Oh, yeah. Brett McGurk joined Lux Capital, a venture capital firm invested in autonomous weapons. Heidi Shyu, the former Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, joined the board of a cyber defense firm with Navy contracts. It's quite a list.
So our sources raise serious questions about how decisions made while in office might have, benefited future clients. Some senators call it lobbying by another name.
That's the allegation, yes. And it's notable that Trump revoked Biden's ethics rules on day one of his second term. Critics say that helped facilitate this kind of shadow lobbying.
And on the budget front, the Pentagon is embarrassed about some sleight of math to reach Trump's trillion-dollar target. Can you explain that sleight of math a bit more?
Absolutely. Essentially, their proposed core budget for 2026, it's $848 billion. That's actually lower than this year's budget.
Lower, but the target is $1 trillion.
Exactly. So to hit that politically symbolic trillion-dollar mark, they have to add a massive $113 billion on top. This isn't part of the regular operational budget. It would likely come from, off-budget accounts or emergency funds.
So it makes the headline number look bigger than the actual base budget.
Precisely. It's a way to hit that big number without necessarily increasing core defense spending in the same proportion.
Okay, shifting gears again, Ukraine. Our sources highlight a significant shift in U.S. policy there. Russia's recent seizure of that valuable lithium field in Donetsk. The reaction from the Trump team was muted.
Very muted, yes. Which speaks volumes, according to the analysis, about the state of the war and where a potential new administration's priorities might lie.
What does it suggest for Ukraine?
Well, it really suggests that time is not on Ukraine's side, and pressing on with the war is not likely to improve Kyiv's battlefield or negotiating position.
So Trump is content to let them fight it out.
He seems content to let Ukraine and Russia keep fighting until they come to settlement terms on their own. That's how the sources see it, which is viewed as, look, not a bad result for Russia, which has momentum on the battlefield, or for the United States, which has no real strategic interest in Ukraine, quote unquote. But it unequivocally leaves Kyiv at a distinct disadvantage.
So effectively, Kyiv is on its own. The sources say empty deals and more pleading will not resurrect U.S. interest and support. That's pretty stark.
It's a stark reality check, yes.
What does it mean for Europe? And are there any levers the West can still pull, even low-cost ones?
It means Europe faces a critical juncture. The analysis suggests there's little that Europe or the U.S. can do to fundamentally change Russia's calculus right now. More sanctions, unlikely to force Putin to back down, and limits on Western defense production constrain military aid.
So what can be done?
Well, the analysis does suggest some low-cost steps for the U.S., maybe resuming bilateral meetings with Russian officials, encouraging direct Russia-Ukraine dialogue, getting Europe on board with a push for peace, perhaps leveraging the U.S.'s upper hand over a, quote, terrified of abandonment European continent.
Finding off-ramps, basically.
The idea seems to be finding off-ramps, yes, rather than continuing a fight that Kyiv's is increasingly, perceived to be losing.
Okay, finally, let's turn to public opinion here at home. Gallup polling data from February 2025, it reveals a striking shift regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yes, striking is the right word. What's truly fascinating here is that sympathy for Israelis has reached its lowest point in 25 years. It stands at 46%.
Lowest in 25 years. And for Palestinians?
Sympathy for Palestinians has risen to its highest point, 33%. That's a 6 percentage point increase from the previous year.
And this shift happened
during a temporary ceasefire and hostage exchange, and it coincided with Prime Minister Netanyahu's White House visit. The persisting humanitarian crisis in Gaza is clearly a significant factor in this change in public sentiment.
And the partisan divide, still there.
Oh, absolutely. Stark. Republicans continue to show strong sympathy for Israelis, 75%. But Democrats now sympathize with Palestinians over Israelis by nearly 3-1. That's 59% versus 21%.
Wow, 3-1 among Democrats.
Yeah. Independent sympathies kind of reflect the national averages. But despite these shifting sympathies, a majority of Americans, 55%, still support establishing an independent Palestinian state. Though, that discussion is largely on hold since the October 7th attacks.
So this data really underscores a significant evolution in how Americans perceive this conflict, especially among Democrats.
Definitely.
So, okay, wrapping this up. What does this all mean for us as we try to absorb these complex global dynamics? We've got the irreconcilable visions for Gaza, the very personalized nature of a potential Trump foreign policy, the clear U.S. disengagement from Ukraine. It feels like a major recalibration.
That's a vital point. It really vividly illustrates how interconnected these crises are, and how domestic political and economic concerns, even shifts in public opinion or a focus on a leaner, cheaper military, how they can ripple outwards and reshape international dynamics.
So understanding these underlying forces is key.
Absolutely key, especially to navigating a world that seems to be constantly shifting beneath our feet.
Indeed. So as you navigate the news and discussions around these topics, maybe consider this. How might these seemingly disparate issues, say, domestic defense spending priorities here in the U.S. and the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza, how might they ultimately influence the long-term prospects for global stability and peace? Or perhaps just prolong the existing stalemates?
Good question to ponder.
Keep digging, keep questioning. We'll be back soon with another deep dive.